Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of the CMI, and each Friday at this time we bring you news and views on management topics that matter. Now, today I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting Gill Whitty-Collins. She's a keynote speaker, a consultant, board member, executive coach, and most relevant for today's discussion, author of Why Men Win at Work. There it is. A great book. Now, I've known Gill for decades, ever since she was senior vice president. Well, sorry, she was senior vice president at P&G, but I knew her back when she was one of my brand managers I was fortunate enough to manage. So welcome, Gill. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to be here with you.
Great.
Really nice.
Okay. Well, we've got to start with the very obvious question. So, Gill, why do men win at work? And why did you decide to write a book about it?
Yeah, so obviously this is the big question. And, there is actually quite a simple answer to the question at the first level. And the simple answer is that men win at work because when the people who make the decisions about who they're going to promote or give a job to or give a project to make that decision, it's not that they go into it thinking I must put a man in this role. They often the opposite, actually, but they make the decision because they choose the person obviously that they think is the best, and most of the time they think the man is better. Of course, they choose the person they think is best. It's in their interest to. And particularly when we get to the more senior levels, 9 times out of 10, they choose the man and they think the man is better. But obviously that can't be right because we know that women are 50% of the population. We know women have equal intelligence, equal capability, equal leadership ability. So it can't possibly be true 90% of the time that the man's better. Maybe 50% of the time, we could argue, but not 90% of the time. So I guess the real question that is interesting for me is, why does that happen then? Why do we so often conclude that the man is better when actually 50% of the time he isn't? And that's obviously a lot more complex, and that is a combination of lots and lots of things, including many invisible, unconscious, even unintended things that are combining to make us have that perception, including what I call the invisible power of culture and how a male dominant culture impacts performance and perception positively for men, not positively for women. The competence versus confidence equation, and how we're all very drawn to confidence, but obviously in general, and it's a generalization, women are less confident, so we can often choose a confident person instead of a competent person. And then my favorite, the umbrella theory, which is, really all about men being a lot more savvy about the fact that the myth of meritocracy doesn't actually really work. And that you need to make your work visible, not just do the work, make it visible, make yourself visible, come out from under your umbrella so that your boss can see you. And it's all, all combining to this invisible ceiling that, we can't see, but all these things are there and they're holding back barriers. And, as I got more and more senior, I didn't really see it when I was younger. But as I got more and more senior, particularly at the senior vice president level, I really started to see these things, became very fascinated by them, and started to think about them and research them, and made myself a promise that when I left that job, I was going to write a book about it and get it all down.
And so you did. And it's quite interesting what you said about you didn't notice it when you were younger. And I think what we call that at CMI is the glass pyramid. And that's because, for example, when you were on my team, we had a very gender balanced team, right? Now we were middle managers, right? Brand managers, certainly not senior vice president level. But what happens is, because women don't progress for all the reasons you're saying, they get fewer and fewer up at the top of the leadership ranks, right? And by the time you get to the top, 9 out of 10 are often male. I guess my next question is going to attract an obvious answer. So, what about the progress we've made or lack of progress we've made at the leadership levels in organizations? And what do you think needs to happen on the part of employers and government and individuals to accelerate progress on this issue?
I'm going to say, I think our progress it's pathetic. I think it's pathetic, and I think every what happens is that every time a woman's promoted to CEO or every woman prime minister in the world is very visible. We make them very, very visible, and we celebrate them. But I think it's just creating a facade of gender equality, to be honest, that a lot of people are believing. And if we just pause a second to look at the facts, as you've said, 7% of CEOs are women. 50% of the population becomes 7% of the CEOs, 9% of heads of state. So, I just think we're absolutely stuck on this. And I don't think we're going anywhere, honestly, without manual intervention. I think we will absolutely stay stuck. And so, to your question, this is why I've come to believe, and I didn't used to, but this is why I've really come to believe in the manual intervention of the 50-50 target for companies and for organizations. And I've come to think it's actually the only way that we're going to fix it. And I know that it's controversial, but it's self-fulfilling prophecy, this, for all of those reasons, all of those invisible forces. And they're so strong, those forces, that if we don't do something really intentional, they'll just keep directing us towards inequality, and they'll just keep directing us to choose unconsciously the man 9 times out of 10. So I think we got to do some really, really big stuff. Otherwise, honestly, I do think we'll be sitting here in 100 years still stuck in the same place.
Yeah, well, the World Economic Forum does say it'll be over 100 years at this pace.
I think they're optimistic. I think it's eternity at this rate.
Yeah, no, it's true. But again, if you said, so what you're saying is, and this makes sense to me, because at the bottom level of organizations, the bottom quartile, it is 50-50, right? Mm-hmm. Because, the recruitment in at the bottom is that. So what you're saying is just keep that promotion rate 50-50 all the way up to the top. Mm-hmm. That seems logical and a great suggestion to me. But now, do you think that older women, so one of my recent guests, Eleanor Mills, just founded something for the 50-plus woman called Noon, because she says 50-plus women are particularly vulnerable to be shed from leadership positions. Do you think that's true? Do you think that, and she says they need a plan B. Do you think that's true? Do you think 50-plus women face particular challenges?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think we've all seen it. And, I think it's obvious, really, isn't it? All those invisible forces that are throughout the career making us conclude so often that the man is better are exactly the same forces that come into play, when we get into our 50s and redundancies and, people get expensive, people start looking for the redundancy candidates. All those same forces are at play as the decisions are being made about who to keep and who to let go. It's the reverse dynamic, but it's exactly the same forces. They're going to 9 times out of 10 conclude that the man is better, even when he isn't, actually. So I think it does get very tough, and clearly we need to address all of those things, and I'm absolutely not saying we don't. But I'll tell you what I would say to any woman, any person actually, but any woman out there who is reaching that stage or has reached that stage and is afraid of it, do not be afraid. You have nothing to fear. You're going to be absolutely fine. And I think one of the things we do, particularly when we're in a company for a long time, is we start to believe that our value as a person, but also, as a worker, as a contributor, is somehow linked to the company or organization that we work for. And it's rubbish. It just isn't. These are your talents These are your capabilities. This is your intelligence. You were just loaning that to the company. They were borrowing it from you. They were buying it from you. It's yours. It's not theirs. If for whatever reason things don't work out, and it's time to move on, take all those brilliant talents and just go find something else really wonderful to do with them. I think it's in many ways the best thing that can happen to you at 50, but it shouldn't happen. And I absolutely think that we've got to work on those forces. Of course we have.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And obviously I've been there, and I know, that you are now there as well. And the point that women, senior women that decide for whatever reason to switch industries or switch jobs, whether it's their own choice or whether they face redundancy, have to have a plan B, right? And that's even more true in this pandemic. COVID has made things worse for women, not better. What management and leadership practices do you think we've seen that can work for women as we emerge from the pandemic? And which of those would you say, yeah, keep that? And what do you think needs to change?
Well, I think I'm going to start with what needs to change. Let's start with the negative. I think we've got to lose this always on thing that seems to have happened to us in the last 18 months. And I know it was always there, but I think it's got worse, and this expectation to be always on somehow because we're at home. My simple brain doesn't get it. It's super unhealthy. My simple brain says, I don't understand why we can't all switch the laptop off at the time we used to leave the office. I don't get that. I think we've got to lose it, and we've got to lose that urgently, because I think it's making some people really, really unhealthy mentally and physically. But obviously, in terms of what to keep, I mean, the most brilliant thing about the last year, if there is anything brilliant about it, I think, is it really has proved, hasn't it, that flexible working does work, and that if you have good employees, you can trust them to work. They will work anywhere for you. And you know what? Sometimes they'll even work harder than they would work if you were actually forcing them to do a commute to come to the office. So I think this is one thing we need to remember forever, that this does work. And if you can't trust your employees, that's a different issue, right? But if you've got employees you can trust them that they'll work anywhere. But I think the biggest thing that's important for me is that isn't just for women, and it shouldn't just be for women. I think one of the key things that we have to do now as we transition back, well, if we transition back, who knows, the news changes every day, but is that when employers make flexible work policies or hybrid work policies, they really do make them gender neutral. Because I do think one of the issues is the expectation that these are for women, these are mum policies, these are things that people who are not 100% committed to their career need. These need to be for everybody, because I think that's the only way we'll get to true equality. We'll get to the equality in the home that comes from having flexibility, which will lead us to the equality at work. But yeah, I really hope we don't forget this lesson. I see some people forgetting it already, so I think we need to remember that.
Constantly remind them. So much in what you said there that obviously we agree with at CMI. And by the way, if you have a question for Gill, you can ask it. We're going to get to questions later on. Just put it in the chat. But a couple of things you said. First of all, trust your workers and they'll be productive. We know that, okay? When we did some big research earlier in the year with lots of managers and employees, and guess what? When you trust your employees, productivity goes up, and when you don't trust your employees, it goes down. Surprise, right? So that's absolutely right. The other thing you said that's so true is men as well as women want to keep working flexibly, right? So again, over half of all parents of either sex, and actually 85% of all managers want to keep this hybrid working, men as well as women. So it's really important that employers do remember that. I think that's a great point. But you talked about hybrid working, and you talked about some people forgetting that lesson already. What do you think the role of the office is going to be as we hopefully move to this future of hybrid working? And how do we prevent what you mentioned happening, where all the men rush back into the office and the women continue to work from home? What do you want to see happen?
I think it comes back to, first and foremost, that absolute clarity from employers that flexible work policies are gender neutral, and they're not just gender neutral on paper. They're absolutely gender neutral in practice as well. Because as you said it, Anne, I know so many men have written to me this year saying, Gill, you talk a lot about us not being 50-50 at home. I actually want to be 50-50 at home, but it's not supported by my employer. My employer really, kind of raises their eyebrows if I ask for flexibility, but they completely accept it when the women do. I mean, that's just sexist the other way around. And so, yes, I absolutely think that making it gender neutral so that it, there really should be no reason in my ideal paradise equality world, there's no reason why men should be more in the office than women, or men should be less at home than the women. For me, what hybrid work should mean is you do your work, but you do it where you need and want to do it. And that doesn't mean you have to go to your employer, whether you're a man or a woman, and say, can I work from home every Friday, please? It's just a given. You work where I want bosses to say, why are you asking me about where you want to work? Work where you want. Just dial in for what you need to dial in for and deliver the work. So for me, that's what I'd love to see. Having said that, I'm not giving up on the office. I don't know about you, but I've spoken to a lot of people who have missed the office. They've missed that line between work and home, which I think has caused work to drift too much into evenings and weekends. They have missed that spontaneous interaction that you have that doesn't happen in Zoom meetings. I think we will want to go to the office, and I certainly think we'll want to go to the office when we need to interact as a team, and we want to interact as a team. So I just see it as being much more office space, being much more flexible. I think they'll probably need less office space, but I always think we're going to want to be together sometimes in an office, and then sometimes, in our own office, with our head down, with nobody disturbing us getting some crap done.
I think you're absolutely right. And our research has also shown that, younger people in particular miss out on development when they're not in the office. They miss the office more likely. Their social lives revolve around the office more. But, and as you say, we all miss those water cooler moments, or just kicking back with colleagues and, bantering, and actually out of that comes ideas, right? But less office space, it seems, is what we're going to see, and I think that's a pretty widespread trend. But now I have to ask last question before we open it up for questions. What lessons have you learned personally as a leader during COVID, and what advice would you give to our listeners as to how they can best shape their careers post-COVID?
So, I think I was saying this to you the other day, I think I've learned more about leadership since I stopped being a leader than I ever did when I was a leader. And I tell you, I would do it very, very differently now. But I think one of the most powerful things I've learned, particularly through COVID, actually, is, my belief in the power of diversity in a team is stronger than it ever was. And it was always strong. It's stronger than it ever was, because, we've seen some real mess ups, haven't we, from not having diversity in the team. I laughed out loud when I saw that article where I think the London School of Economics had basically researched and said that the government didn't have women in the room to discuss COVID plans and policies. So they should have had a gender expert there. And you think, no, they didn't need a gender expert there. They just needed some women there. That's what they needed. So, I think my big advice to any leader, if you're not doing it already, is look around you, look at your team. Every time you go into a meeting with your team, whether it's real or virtual, look around you. Do you see a dominant culture? And if you do, you've got a problem and you need to act now, because if you see a dominant culture, you don't have diversity. That means you're not getting the best out of everyone. You're not getting the best inputs. the best discussions, the best ideas, and therefore you're going to miss things. You're just going to miss things. You're going to make incomplete decisions. You're going to get inferior results to the results and outcomes that you could have got. So I would be obsessed about that now. If I was a CEO now, I would be, alarm bells would be going on. For me, we should be looking at our team, and we should be looking at a load of people who look and sound nothing like each other. That's the diversity dream. And it's not just, hey, let's do that because that's nice. That will lead to better outcomes. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of research that says you're absolutely right. Diverse teams make better decisions, and when you have groupthink, you make very bad decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really what you're saying, and I could not agree with you more on that. And indeed, great advice. Look at your teams. If they're not diverse, do something about it, right? You're getting it wrong. Okay, first question from Jackie. You mentioned earlier in the interview that women suffer more from confidence issues than men do. What strategies would you recommend for women to counter this and believe more in themselves, their skills and abilities?
Yes, great question. You know, the big thing about confidence for me is firstly just accepting it is important. It's human for us to be drawn to confident people. We trust them. They trust themselves, so we trust them. So I think, you know, anyone who doesn't naturally feel strong confidence does need to address that. But I actually believe, you know, we know that women are generally less, not always true, they're generally less confident for reasons that start in childhood, at school, perfectionist syndrome developed, all of that stuff. I deeply believe that everybody has confidence inside them, and they just got to find it. And I'm a huge fan of using something like StrengthsFinder, big fan of StrengthsFinder. Using something like StrengthsFinder, take that time as early as possible in your career. I did it too late. As early as possible in your career to really understand your strengths. What are your strengths? There are some things you're not good at. None of us, all of us are not good at some stuff. There are some things that are your talents, they're unique to you, and they are your superpowers. Knowing those as early as you can, and then speaking from there, working from there. So when you're in meetings or you're in those situations, if you're coming from there, from that confident core that you just know is like, you know what, you can shake me on some things, but on these things you can't shake me. My number one strength in StrengthsFinder is strategic, right? So I know people can have a go at me, but if anyone tries to question that, I bet, you know, I just would find that laughable. That's what you need to get to. I just know this because when you speak from there and you work from there, people will feel it. That will be genuine confidence, not trying to fake confidence, which doesn't work. It's not authentic. So yeah, if you haven't done it already, just take some time. It doesn't take long, and just really find those things that are your confident core would be my advice.
That's great advice. And leading from strengths is always much more productive than trying to fix weaknesses, right? So it's great advice. Question from Natasha. How can we face the challenge and keep positive given such inequality? It affects psychology and self-esteem.
Oh, I know. I mean, you know, obviously I work a lot in this area, and I do have days when I think, oh my goodness, we are so stuck here and the progress is pathetic. But they're not off. It's not often, because mostly what I feel is, I guess like anything in life, we've got to keep going, haven't we? And I think the biggest thing that probably keeps me positive is, well, firstly, that I just don't want us to hand this on to the next generation, because I think they are, in their raw form, this new generation, they don't even understand it. Before they go into the workplace, they don't even understand it. They're like, I honestly don't understand why on earth you would think that a woman wasn't as good as a man, and yet we're going to send them into this workplace and we're going to direct them towards inequality. So let's not do that to them. We've got to just keep going and keep fighting. And the other thing that keeps me positive is the intentions. You know, the biggest thing that I've learned in writing this book and in talking about this book and in talking about this issue, I don't get a lot of men coming to me saying, Gill, I disagree with you. I don't think women are equal. I don't think they should be equal. I'd like to build the patriarchy and destroy women. That's not what I get. What I get is a lot of men saying, I absolutely consider myself a feminist. I absolutely support women. I absolutely want to do this. Help me understand how I'm contributing to this. And, you know, they'll read the book or they'll have a discussion and they'll say, I know what to do now and I'm doing different things today because of it. This is caused by many, many, many complex things. Most of them are unintended, and we can work with that. If people have good intentions, we can get there. So most days, Natasha, I'm positive.
That's great. And you're right. You know, people want help and they need help. And so Tariq is asking, what are your observations about different attitudes to diversity across the globe? And where do people get this right?
So there are definitely different attitudes, and there are different levels of progress. I don't see anywhere where they're getting it what I would call perfectly right. Nowhere is gender equality paradise yet. But I think there's no doubt that, you know, countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland are making more progress. They are closer. And one of the key reasons for that is, for example, gender-neutral parental policies. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Sweden, they have a gender-neutral parental policy. A man is entitled to take as much paternity leave as a woman is entitled to take maternity leave, I think excluding the biological recovery. But so they really, really believe in this. And by the way, their childcare is fantastic. Yep. You know, if you look at the UK, you know, childcare, it's inaccessible and it's unaffordable. For some women, childcare is eating up the entirety of their monthly salary. If we make childcare inaccessible and unaffordable, usually the consequence will be that it's the woman who gives up her career or downsizes it, not the man, usually. So it's just an absolute recipe for gender inequality. So again, countries like Sweden, Germany also, Korea, by the way, have fantastic childcare policies where I think from the age of 1, basically either free or at a very low percentage of your salary, you can have your child in full-time childcare. So some countries are definitely ahead of the game. And we're seeing some countries now actually, other countries introducing gender-neutral parental leave. So hopefully we'll follow. But I can't tell you, yes, move to this country. They've got it completely sorted.
But the northern countries are on your radar, right? But, you know, the German thing, they do have those gender neutral parental policies, but they've just made it a law to have quotas in the executive ranks because they haven't cracked that, you know, despite having Angela Merkel as a leader.
I know.
I mean, you know,
the target they set for women on boards was 1.
I know.
To me, that's an embarrassment, and it's patronizing and it's sexist. So yes, definitely not putting them up there as gender equality paradise yet.
No. Well, so much progress still to be made. So last question here is from Jason. Are the problems we face today a result of perennial male bias, or do you think it's more about workplace customs and government policy instruments needing to become more innovative to catch up with more progressive attitudes that are now emerging?
I think, I mean, 2 parts to that. I don't necessarily look at it as brutally as this is a result of perennial male bias, because I think that sounds more intentional than it is. I think in most cases, the bias is unconscious and it's unintended. What it comes from is the male dominant culture. So in most workplaces, not all, but in most, at the senior levels, you'll have a male dominant culture. And that just by definition, it doesn't realize it's doing it, but it's just reinforcing itself constantly, because men feel more included, belonging, they perform better. It doesn't realize it's happening. It's the goldfish in the bowl. You ask it, how's the water? And it says, what water? That's it. It's not intended, but it is happening. But yes, because of all these things, I think the second part of your question is absolutely right. I think we need employer policies, but also government policies to just intervene and say, you know, this self-fulfilling prophecy is going to continue to fulfill itself until eternity, unless we actually intervene and change some things. on, you know, for example, setting targets, calling out 50-50 as non-negotiable, calling out gender neutral, flexible work policies, parental policies, providing childcare so the woman doesn't have to decide to drop out. Manual interventions, I hate it, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere without them, to be honest.
Well, and what a clear list you've given us. So everybody listening, very clear list of what you can do to tackle this perennial problem. Gill, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks everybody for listening. Don't forget Why Men Win at Work, a great book where you can get all of this advice. And if you enjoyed today's chat, do consider joining the CMI. You'll find out how to do so in the chat box. Thanks very much, everybody. I'm off next Friday, but Matt will be here for Better Managers Briefing once again. Take care.
Thank you.